Welcome to Textination. Joining us is Alex Roy, editor-at-large at The Drive. He's a TV host, author, podcaster, and cannonball driver. Thanks for joining us, Alex.
Well, thanks. To be fair, I never did the actual Cannonball Run, which took place in the 70s. But I guess
If you did, you would have been way too young.
yeah, way too young. But Cannonball is kind of in the vernacular now for driving cross country as fast as you can.
Well, tell us a little bit about your background and what led you into this.
Well, I grew up in the car business. My dad was a Citroën and Peugeot importer, and he was a big fan of the Cannonball Run and wanted to do it and didn't. And so when I was younger and a little crazier, I decided I would try. I wanted to break the cross country record, and I think I was the first person in about 25 years to successfully do it.
And tell us about that, when you did it and how you did it. And people are going to be able to experience this for themselves with a fairly new documentary that's out there.
Right. So the documentary is called Apex, the secret race across America. Back in 2005, I became aware that these races had continued into the 80s. And so I studied all of the interviews with the old drivers and spent, probably 2 years researching, police locations, weather and traffic patterns. I prepared a car. We had night vision and a spotter plane. And in 2006, we did actually break the record. I wrote a book about it called The Driver and worked on this movie, which finally came out after almost 14 years of work.
Wow. And it's narrated by Ice-T. You've got a lot of history here and people in it who I had no idea were involved with some of the history here. Rick Doherty and Will Wright, both of whom, Rick I knew from covering consumer technology, and Will Wright in his game development history.
Yeah,
So
it's funny. Will Wright, I didn't know that he was involved either. If you know The Sims or Sim City, to me he was a hero in college. And then years later to learn that he had done this race in the 80s, and Rick Doherty, who was quite well known as well, he's friends with Steve Wozniak. So these people back in the 80s were not the reckless, criminals that one would think based on the Burt Reynolds movie of the same name. These people are very quantitative, deeply professional people, and the way they approached the record was scientific. Legend has it that in '83, the FBI and other law enforcement agencies decided to crack down on these underground races. These were the U.S. Express race is what they called it after the Cannonball, to keep it as secret as possible. And so, when I learned what kind of people had done it, and I knew they were not professional race car drivers, I thought to myself, well, I'm a pretty quantitative person. I'm going to give it a shot. And we did.
you put a team together. Obviously, you couldn't do something like this alone. So tell us about that.
So my co-driver was David Maher, who's an old friend and semi-professional race car driver, a better driver than I am. I was more of the kind of the planner, and we split the driving probably at 55-45 in his favor. And we had probably a dozen people on our team helping out. We had a guy named J.F. Musial, who's now a producer and founder of Drive, and a movie called Apex, the story of the hypercar. He back then was basically working for me part-time. He was straight out of college. And a collection of friends across the country who researched weather and traffic and provided kind of ground crews. And of course, we had this air crew flying a Cessna on one attempt and then a King Air on another attempt. They would fly overhead and match speeds with us, look for police, and then radio us their locations.
So how long did it take you to drive from New York to L.A.?
Well, I guess I'm giving away the punchline of the film, but it's not. The film isn't just about us. We did it in 31 hours and 4 minutes, which was just over an hour faster than the prior record from 1983. We went several times before we were successful, and I'm always inspired by the story of Roger Bannister, the first man to break the 4-minute mile as a runner, because for a century people said no one would ever break a 4-minute mile. It was physically impossible. And after he did it, and he was a medical student, not a full-time athlete. After he went, hundreds of people broke the 4-minute mile because it was a mental barrier and it required a lot of willpower and a bunch of science.
Well, I was watching this with my wife, the documentary. Wonderful, entertaining, a lot of history, as we said, a lot of nuts and bolts, so to speak. And my wife is saying, "Why weren't these people arrested?" So why weren't you arrested?
So
Good planning, I guess.
Well, a lot of it has to do with just first of all not getting caught. So, if there's this culture, based on like Fast and Furious street racing, of young people getting in cars and flooring it and just whatever. This is the opposite of that. It's the difference between sprinting and like a marathon. And so if you're going to run a marathon, you want to go in good weather and you want to go when you don't have obstacles. So there are several dates a year that are optimal with less police on the road and less traffic. Safety is a huge, huge thing. You cannot do this in bad weather on busy roads. So if you plan it correctly, you will go when there are as few people on the road as possible. And then secondly, you have to have binoculars, night vision, police scanner, laser jammers, radar detector. You have every single piece of hardware in the car that you need to be aware of your surroundings. I would argue that the people who've done this, I mean, I think my team at least, are probably safer while doing it than the average person on the road who's really not paying attention. And that's reflected in almost 40,000 fatalities a year on our roads. We don't have very good driver education in this country. And if everybody drove like we did, well, I don't want to say like we did, but we were driving not much really not any faster than commuters do in Germany on the average morning. So, and of course the film was delayed and my book were delayed over a year after we did it in order to avoid the criminal statutes in most places. And I ended up being invited to speak at the FBI Academy and many other law enforcement agencies as a friend of law enforcement, which is odd because I guess they felt that if anyone's going to do it, it better be someone who's taking it seriously. And so I have lots of friends in law enforcement today.
How much concern, though, did you have, not just for your own safety, but for the safety of other people who, their behavior might be really unpredictable when they see a car as fast as yours coming along?
Well, a lot. We start with going again when there's few people on the road as possible, and secondly, you have the co-driver has their binoculars up, observing the behavior of trucks and cars ahead, in order to kind of determine whether or not they're going to move or not. You're on the CB radio, communicating with truckers ahead of time, in order to alert them as to your approach. Because truckers, they like to know what's happening. They don't like surprises, and they're trucks. And so, you're taking, like we do every day, a calculated risk every time you get into a car. And if you're going to go faster, you have to increase proportionally your prediction and awareness of other people on the road.
How many times have you driven cross country now? Because you've continued this, but not trying to break the record, I guess.
I've, driven cross country nonstop hundreds of times, probably. In subsequent years, I became really interested in, autonomous vehicles and, driver assistance systems, and especially electric vehicles. So most recently in 2018, I went cross country with a friend named Dan Zarilla. We set the electric vehicle record in a Tesla. That was probably the third or fourth time I'd done that. And, every year I go out again in an electric vehicle to investigate, and as a fan of kind of green technology, on when electric vehicles will eventually surpass internal combustion for efficiency and range and charging infrastructure. And so this is probably never going to end for me, although I get slower every year, and I know it. So I can't wait for autonomous vehicles because I'd like to be the first guy to go cross country as a passenger.
And you're working with a company that's trying to make that happen, right? Argo AI.
Yeah. Yes. And just so we're clear, Argo AI does not endorse or support any of these activities.
I can see the disclaimer crawling across the screen. Okay.
Yeah. The disclaimer. Well, I mean, there's no question in my mind that autonomous vehicles are inevitable, and that technology is only as good as we choose it to be. And so, as someone who's with firsthand experience, I guess doing things on the roads that are out of bounds, um, I feel that I like to support the good guys in the effort to deploy autonomous vehicles. In the same way that a camera can be used for good or it can be used for surveillance, an autonomous vehicle can be deployed to improve communities, or not. And so I believe in Argo's approach.
Well, tell us. I mean, it seems it may seem odd to a lot of people that someone with your history and this accomplishment is concerned today with vehicle safety and safety on the road. So how do you justify all of that?
First, I'm a father today, and the events in the film are 15 years ago. I have friends in quite recently who've gone out and broken my record by, I mean, hours. People I know who went across recently in 27 hours.
So people who are still doing this,
oh yeah,
and doing it every year.
Yes, they are. And it seems very clear to me that the kind of thinking that it took to break the record as we did and after us is the same type of thinking that leads to, depending on your point of view, great innovation. People will always use tools that are available to them to do things that they're not designed for, and that's innovation. 110 years ago, Irwin Cannonball Baker, was hired by Cadillac and Stutz and Gardner and all the early car companies to demonstrate that internal combustion vehicles, privately owned, were safer, more efficient, and polluted less than horses and trains. And that is how cannonballing started. He drove cross country 1915, and then pretty much every year for decades to demonstrate the superiority of cars, the best cars of that time. Today we live with the consequences of what things he did. And so, I think it's important to think out of the box. If 20 years ago, it might have seemed crazy that we'd ever have shared autonomous fleets in city centers, and protected bike lanes and, functional mass transit. And yet, some of those things exist in other countries. When autonomous vehicles arrive, they're going to be a huge benefit if they're deployed wisely in this kind of interlocking ecosystem of modes. And, I have thought a lot about the fastest way to get across Manhattan. It's not in a car. And so I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to help a company that is thinking out of the box. Not everybody who builds an autonomous vehicle is going to be successful deploying them, even if the technology functions. There's a business to be built, and I'm glad to be part of that business.
And what are your thoughts about how they should be deployed, autonomous vehicles? Private ownership, mobility services?
Well, it's going to start, and in the beginning, it's going to be shared autonomous fleets, and in urban cores, because that's where the business is, and you need to scale that business. At some later date, there'll be, I'm sure, some private ownership option. That deserves a show in itself, because deploying that is going to be complex, and the boundaries of where this technology works in the beginning, we'll keep them in cities, and that's fine. I think the most important thing is that people not over trust the systems that they observe on the road today, and that they trust the systems not because of kind of media and claims, but because of their own personal observation. We know that if you're going to go jump out of a plane and you wear a parachute, you want to bring it back up, but that is a risky endeavor. People do it all the time, but an autonomous vehicle, it needs to be like a utility, like reliable, always on, always there, and embedded in communities. It can't be the way Elon Musk casts it as, well, it might work. It's got to work, and we've got to trust it. And so treating it like an invention is maybe not the way to approach it. We've got to treat it like a heat or utility. And I really, really, really believe that I don't want to say my kids won't have a driver's license, but that they will rely on it as we rely on light or heat in an apartment today. And I look forward to that day.
Where do things stand today with the technology? Public perception is well, there's a lot of fear out there still, but there's a lot of skepticism. Let's put it that way.
Well, the skepticism is warranted because a lot of claims have been made. A lot of people have overpromised and underdelivered. I, as a pretty vocal and loud person myself, um, have been a huge, I guess, opponent of grandiose claims. And so the companies that keep their heads down and do the hard work and have like a pragmatic approach. I mean, I believe, I think I've voted with my time as to which company I believe is doing it correctly. Those companies will succeed. But companies that make crazy claims and miss deadlines, and I don't need to name names here. I drive a Tesla, love it, but the people who paid for, quote unquote full self-driving capabilities 4 years ago still haven't seen it. And so, you know, I know that my vehicle has great driver's assistance. I know that it is not capable of driving itself. And so I think people are confusing those two things. It's very important that they don't. And there's really a lot of education to be done about what these things can and can't do.
And there's the question of is the technology being built not just into Teslas but many other vehicles as well? Is it making us safer today on the road, or
to be clear,
on one hand, people can trust it too much, and that makes us less safe?
Let's be really clear. There's driver assistance, and then there's level 4, automation. Level 4 automation is a vehicle that can drive itself under certain conditions without a human in the driver's seat supervising it. That's what level 4 is. A Tesla is not that ever at all. At least when I say ever, I mean today. So you get into a Tesla or almost any other vehicle, and we have automatic emergency braking. We have some form of maybe lane keeping or lane centering, forward collision warning, and cruise control. And so you put all these things together, and you have what goes into a Tesla, and it works if you pay attention quite well. I use it all the time, and I love it. But people are confusing what happens in a Tesla with what is coming in the next few years, which is level 4 autonomous vehicle services in urban cores. And so in a Tesla, you're responsible. It doesn't matter what happens, right or wrong, whether you trust it or not, whether you're confused or not, you're responsible. That's your car. And that's not at all what shared urban autonomous fleets are going to be doing. When you get into a taxi today, you as a passenger have no liability. It's all on the driver or the service from which you got the car. You're just the passenger, and that's really the difference. When I get into a shared urban autonomous vehicle in the future, I want to be a passenger. The responsibility lies on the company who that provided the service to me, or whomever, whatever vendor it is, and that's what I want. I don't want to get in the back of a car and then have to just assume that it's going to work. I want to trust it, and that's a huge dividing line between driver assistance and L4 autonomy.
How fast do you see this rolling out in a big way?
Well, that's a question everyone's been asking, but it's not really a question of how fast, but of where and how. There are autonomous vehicles operating today in airports. You can take a shuttle from at Pittsburgh Airport, many other airports. There's basically a train that runs without a driver from one side of the airport to the other. So if your fence is small enough, excuse me, you can get in an autonomous vehicle today. In the coming years, I mean, we already have it in, I guess, in Arizona. Waymo's offering service with safety drivers. And I think they have a few vehicles without safety drivers right now. I think it's less than, it might only be 3 or 4 vehicles. This is going to scale out from other companies in other cities. But it's going to be slow, and it's going to be, if done correctly, patient and meticulous. And so I don't think we're going to see, ubiquity and a total takeover in the next few years anywhere, but you will see an increasing number of them on the road in the next 3 to 5 years. Argo's operating in Miami and Austin. GM's operating in San Francisco. It's going to be gradual. And then one day we're going to wake up and they're going to be everywhere. We're going to take it for granted. I'm always moved by how electrical power grids were built out in the late 19th century. Because at the time, Edison was selling the solution of putting a generator, in each neighborhood, and then the power would, only go so far, and required understanding how the difference between alternating current and direct current in order to put a big generator outside a city and run power throughout it. And so it took years to figure this out, and then it was solved. And that's what's going to happen with autonomous vehicles.
So much more to talk about, but we're going to save that for a future podcast we hope you'll join us for. But for the movie Apex, The Secret Race Across America, where can people go to watch?
Apex, The Secret Race is available on iTunes and Amazon and Google Play in almost every country today. And I look forward to getting lots more messages from people, many of whom want to go, and some of whom will never forgive me for doing something crazy 15 years ago.
And to follow you and all your other work, podcasting, et cetera, where do you want to steer people?
Best place to follow me is AlexRoy144 on all platforms. And I have a wonderful podcast with Brian Selesky, the CEO of Argo AI, called No Parking Podcast, which is out right now.
Terrific. Alex Roy, thank you for taking the time with us.
Thank you so much, Fred.
Cooking with the Power of the Sun. Hi, I'm Fred Fishkin, here to tell you about the latest innovation from my friend Patrick Sherwin and his great team at GoSun Stove. The GoSun Fusion has arrived using the company's tried and true reflectors and a solar vacuum tube to get you cooking without the mess of charcoal, heavy propane tanks, or smoke. A really bright idea. And with an optional solar panel and battery storage and the ability to plug in at home or on the road, you really can use the GoSun Fusion to cook anytime and anywhere, day or night, rain or shine. I love what Patrick and his team are doing, and so will you. Want to learn more? Head to gosun.co to check out all of the company's products and innovations, and use the code Techstination to save 10%. That's gosun.co.